Do you ever hear the one about the seafaring goat people who wanted to turn the whole world into a swamp? How they worshipped a magic crocodile, followed a strict vegan diet, but then treated themselves to a bit of ritualistic cannibalism here and there. They'd go on to ally themselves with a sea nymph, punch a fairy's lights out, and were stopped short of world domination because they were just too stupid to read. You didn't hear that one? Well, buckle up. Age of Wonders 4 is back, and once more acting as the platform to live out some truly bizarre fantasy tropes. The new minor expansion, Primal Fury, debuts with the Wolf update. This double bill is bringing a whole load to the game, and there's a lot to unpack. So let's see what's coming up. Before we well and truly dive in, let's have an overview of what's new. I'll start with the DLC. The expansion ships with two new forms, the first being Lupine, dwarf people that excel in pack tactics to overwhelm their foes. The other is Goatkin, resilient beings who will quite happily halt the flow of battle just so they can have a quick nibble on some grass. Which is better? I'm gonna go with goats, but you're welcome to argue with me on that in the comments. The main attraction is the new culture, Primal, a primitive clan that can call on the awesome power of nature through their chosen spirit. When making your people, you'll choose one of these 7 spirits to follow. Each provides different bonuses, affinities, and lets you summon said spirit in battle. There are 2 new tomes. Fey Mists lets you create and utilize mist like a mischievous little pixie, and the Tome of the Stormborne provides coastal improvements and the option to turn yourself into a Naga. There's new wildlife, mounts, achievements, and even pre-made characters. Fans of the older games can welcome Arvik the Dark and Serena back into the fray. Serena will take center stage in the new realm, the Storm-Wreathed Lands. At the center of the map, she clashes with her old foe Nimue, and it's up to you to usher in an age of peace between them. Or kill one of them. Or both, if that's more your thing. But wait, there's more. So that's all in the DLC. That's all paid content. Also shipping at the same time is the Wolf update, and there's some big things here. War bounties let you put a price on enemy cities and have other players conquer them for you. Necromancy has received a complete overhaul, hero recruitment and behavior has been redone, the free cities are updated, and your pantheon has been expanded and upgraded. There's also a ton of quality of life additions here and there, and my personal favorite thing, you can now name your starting city in the faction creator menu. So there's a hell of a lot to cover, both in the DLC and in the base game, and I figure the best way to go through all of this is to walk through a match and see how each of these systems come into effect. So let's take our little goat friends for a spin. I opted to go with the new map. The premise sounds cool, and I tried water-based gameplay once and hated it. I figured it was about time to give it another go, but with an open mind. I'd imagined the whole terraforming aspect of the primal culture was a mid to late game engine, but it kicked in immediately. Somewhere near your starting city, there'll be a primal den, and once you've communed with your counterpart, absorbed it into your lands, and built a temple, it'll start flipping tiles. Within a few turns, I was living out Shrek's wildest fantasies and converting the whole world into my swamp. Summoning your spirit in combat is a pretty big deal. It's cheap and it hits like a truck. Early fights were a breeze when I could just drop an ephemeral crocodile on the enemy backline and have it chomp through a few archers. You can also summon your spirit in water tiles, and I don't know why I was so surprised by that. I forgot crocodiles could, swim. But I'm glad they can, because it meant that this spell was pretty much being used in every combat scenario I got into. Primal cultures also have access to Rising Fury. As your units attack, they gain a stacking buff, and at 5 stacks gain a new effect, tailored to which primal spirit you follow. In my case, base attacks would inflict blight damage and disease foes, but followers of the Mammoth inflict cold damage and can freeze opponents, whereas Wolf Primals deal spirit damage that's amplified by having other friendly units nearby. They all have different effects and damage types, and your primal spirit of choice can and probably will affect your approach to combat. So the early game is smooth. You're doing a lot of landscaping, and clearing your continent is simple enough when you have a giant crocodile. The culture's food generation bonuses meant I could build a hefty city quickly and turn the entire continent into a lovely, inviting, fetid swamp. But whilst I was busy with my landscaping projects, war was breaking out between Nimue and Serena, and bounties started to get posted. This feature basically lets you pick objectives. Capture this city, get a reward. It's as simple as that. But honestly, I think this adds so much. As the bounty taker, there's some decent rewards available to you if you have an army just sitting around doing nothing. As the bounty poster, it gives you an option to call other powers to war and force your opponent into several fronts. As an aggressor, it requires you to think about who you pick on, because that unassuming neighbor with a rubbish standing army could just quite happily put a bounty on all your cities and bring other empires into the fray. It's a really simple concept, but it adds a lot. What starts out as a bit of low-key expansion could quickly devolve into all-out total war. So, bounties got posted, people went to war, debts were paid, and slowly the game turned into a mass struggle, centered around the primal debacle between Serena and Nimue. I lent into my swamps being even more uninviting by taking the new tome of the Fey Mists. This blankets your land in fog, which is obviously very atmospheric and cool, but more importantly, it provides several combat bonuses. This wasn't game-changing, but it slotted nicely into my gameplay and theme. The other new tome, Stormborne, was pretty huge. Tailored to coastal and island empires, it gives you a city structure that provides gold and mana, and a spell that doubles base resources from water tiles. If you really want to lean down that route, you can also use the Naga form major transformation, but this looked really silly on a bunch of goat people, so I immediately loaded an earlier save after doing this. Stormborne, along with the experienced Seafarer's perk and Empire skill upgrades, meant that water tiles were pumping out resources. The downside was, well, the Kraken attacks. Sensible thing would have been to clear the camps and keep the oceans free and clear, but that seemed like a lot of work on my end. Besides, all my armies had been sent to the meat grinder in an all-consuming war to anoint Nimue as, well, to be honest, I wasn't too sure why they were fighting. Probably something important given the tens of thousands of lives that were lost. After a grueling campaign, Serena was defeated as my goats rolled through her capital in the last few turns. Unfortunately, I hadn't been paying attention to my relationship with Nimue and she had cancelled our alliance and I no longer had the requirements to finish the scenario. Oh dear. Anyway, the scenario did showcase a lot of the new features. The primal culture is interesting and by design malleable. I think the bounty system is great and the new tomes proved useful to my game plan. The little quality of life changes and improvements to city-states weren't as obvious. I picked up on them here and there and they just seem to blend in seamlessly. For instance, there's now visual variation on forest tiles around the world and this just makes everything feel a bit more varied. Didn't clock it straight away, but it's a nice touch. To check out the Necromancy overhaul, I started a new game and the changes were obvious straight out of the gates, where once you'd collect souls and build skeletons in your cities, now, well, you just don't. After combat, you have the option to raise units. This depends on the type of enemy killed. Early game, when you're wailing on stray halflings here and there, you can only raise little skeletons. But as you take on bigger prey, you can bring them back as bone horrors or skeletal dragons. Honestly, this is just better. It makes way more sense thematically and it just keeps the gameplay momentum up. Skeletons come in different varieties and you can just keep sending them into the meat grinder and raising new ones, which is so on brand. When you're in a long conquest in distant lands, the fires of your campaign keep burning as you consistently add fallen foes to your armies after battles. And not to mention, it means your cities aren't stuck pumping out low-tier skeletons perpetually, and you can have them producing units that complement your bony legions. The entire system just seemed to work better with itself. This is a really good change. It worked so well in fact that it carried me to victory and I actually got to see the new pantheon changes, which I figured was something I wouldn't be able to cover after my Goatkin fumble. So now, when you ascend a hero to join your pantheon, they get to pick a special trait that they'll receive when they pop up in your games. And these are pretty powerful. Now, seeing a past champion pop up won't just be a nice nod, but a real oh snap moment that'll bring something big to the table. They'll also keep all their transformations and remember your tome choices. And on the topic of transformations, there's now an option to disable the visuals of your racial changes, which is great for those of you who do tend to go a bit too far in messing with your people's genetic makeup. All in all, there's a lot to process. While I think the expansion brings a hefty amount of content, I genuinely think that the free update provides more. That's not to discredit the DLC. I'm just such a huge fan of the Necromancy update and bounty system. Big props to Triumph for not locking those features behind a paywall. Saying that though, the DLC is really solid. And for the price, it adds a lot. If you like the idea of the new culture, it is a no-brainer. But there's also the other angle that makes the culture compelling. Let's say you've got opponents trying to flip tiles around the world to tundra or desert. Now, no one wants to live in those places, and if left unchecked, they'll spread those tiles around the world and decrease your potential settling spots. And given how effective primals are at generating food, they'll do it pretty quickly. You have an opponent doing this, and you're going to want to step in and stop the madness. Or, if they're sharing a continent with a rival, maybe you support them. Let them make half the world a barren hellhole while you carve up the rest. It's a really interesting paradigm, and I think it's a good addition to the game whether you want to play as them or not. Also, wolf people and goatkin, pretty damn cool if you ask me. Age of Wonders 4 started out strong, and each edition is really making the game better and better. Yes, there are areas I'd love to see improvements in, AI, trade and diplomacy being blind spots in my opinion. The devs have been throwing out curveballs with the DLCs so far, and for me, they've all landed. This is another robust addition that makes a good game better, and I think it'll meld well with fans of the game. At this point, I think the game is in a really good place, and I'm eager to see where the devs take it next, as long as that destination involves raptors. So what's the defining feature for you? And where do you want to see the game go in future updates? Please leave a comment down below, and I will catch you next time.